Hey, everybody, welcome back to the channel. And we're continuing our segment getting into financial topics, trending topics relating from the perspective of men and women. We just did one on women that's actually going to be facing a similar topic that we're getting into for the men now. This one's on men. And the topic here, and don't mind I have my laptop over here, I'm going to be reading from for certain keynotes. So the topic here is side hustles, autonomy, and the trap of hustle culture burnout. Before I dive into the lengthy detail on here, I just want to say essentially just a quick sum up of that is really just kind of coming into this space of kind of what you see here, what you see a lot of people doing now in the social media space or just private business space. It may not be social media, even though that tends to be the trend of where a lot of this kind of goes to. But because social media is now the, how should I say, the backbone of people when they start their business, advertisement, letting themselves be known. So even if you do a business that is selling products, whatever the case is, you still got to have a social media page. You probably have a Facebook page, you probably have an Instagram page. You got maybe a website. You've got, some type of video thing going on, whether it's YouTube, whether it's anything like that, just to promote yourself in all these different spaces. Sometime one of them, sometime all of them. So that kind of gives an idea of where the burnout comes into play. But reading over here, as far as the basis of it, it says, faced with the stagnant primary wages and unprecedented number of young men have turned to the gig economy or digital side hustles to supplement their income. However, the culture pressures to monetize every personal hobby has triggered a quiet crisis of chronic burnout. Furthermore, operating outside corporate frameworks means navigating the highly complex, unglamorous back end of self-employment without a safety net. So some of the key points of discussions here that are mentioned are drawing a hard line between a healthy pursuit of financial independence and toxic productivity, acknowledging the hidden cost of the lack of structural benefits, things like in parentheses, health insurance, 401k matches, in solo ventures. So pretty much, and as I summed up at the beginning of the video, but pretty much, and this is similar to the topic that we just covered in regards to women having a similar issue that is on their mind or on discussion right now. But the thing about it is, I would say it's a little bit more detailed because it seems like there is an element of not just trying to figure it out, but I would say even taking over their primary, like 9 to 5 or whatever the case is, because essentially the side hustle becomes the primary because especially if you're a man and you're trying to do this for the purpose of sustaining a household and it's not just you. And I think that when it comes to the topic of women in a similar basis, like I said in the previous video we covered, I think it's coming more from the perspective of not being the sole breadwinner, or if you are, it's because you're single and you're trying to do that, as opposed to there's a lot of men who are trying to do this from the space of covering the whole household, or coming from the space of, if I'm single, it's to be able to sustain a household when I do find somebody. So I think that creates another dynamic of, it's not just the side hustle, it becomes the norm, especially when if you're doing 9 to 5 and then you're trying to put in as much time as you can into the side hustle. You're trying to put in enough work so it takes over as the full time, because a lot of these things actually cannot be sustained as just side hustle only, because the amount of momentum needed to keep them growing, to keep them sustaining, it almost always needs an upward trajectory, and it can't just be a plateau trajectory with a lot of these side hustles, because it's just part of the nature of the business. If you are not constantly putting yourself out there, if you're not constantly trying to expand, get more exposure, what ends up happening is that you start falling downwards. So if you're not going upwards, you're falling downwards. And that's one thing that a lot of people don't really talk about in these spaces. Now, it depends on the type of business, but as far as what this topic seems to be discussing is more the digital, as they mentioned here, the digital side hustles, freelance, this and that, all these kind of things that seem like it goes into that space of, not just operating like, say, a side business, like, okay, I own a little storefront and I'm selling things while I'm doing a regular 9 to 5. It doesn't seem to be indicating that as far as what I'm gathering. And I would say that there definitely is a very strong, level of burnout that comes along with that, because that constant, like I just said, to keep elevating, does burn you out, especially when you're trying to navigate how do you do this? A lot of people don't know how to do it and they jump into a space they don't know how to do. And it's easy to come from a space of, okay, I've dabbled in social media before. I make posts on Facebook. I make posts on Instagram. I make posts on TikTok, whatever the case is. And then going into a space where, okay, I just want to have some fun with that. Turns to a little hobby, turns to a little kind of side hustle. Then eventually you kind of hit a point where you're like, I'm not trained to know where to take this. And this is where it comes into the question of acknowledging, it says, the hidden cost of the lack of structural benefits in terms of health insurance, this and that, 401k and those other kind of things. As you expand the business, those things start to come into play, especially when it comes to, are you still on a solo level as your business grows? A lot of people who are in these spaces, they start to grow in their business and it gets to a point where they start having to hire help, start having to hire editors, start having to hire people who write their narratives for them, come up with story ideas. If they're doing like just, podcasts or type of content like that. If you're doing things like selling businesses, sometime even then it's very similar. Maybe you're doing video channels on products that you're selling. And in the back end, you're also, maybe have a storefront. Maybe you are working for other companies, doing product advertisement, maybe all these kind of different things. The point is, it still kind of converges to the same space, which is this engine of, I need to hire more people. So now I got to give them health insurance. I got to give myself health insurance. So those are two dynamics right there. Are you solo or are you with a team? If you're solo, you still got to get health insurance for yourself, plot out 401k for yourself. If you have a team, you got to probably get health insurance for them. Now you could just pay them and say, you guys get all the other things you're going to get on your own. But I think that also then, some of these people don't have to, it depends on where you want to go with it, but it's still something you have to have in your mind and kind of frame it out in your mind as far as what are you doing. Now, the actionable angles on this says treating every side hustle like an independent business from day one, which is a good idea. Automating a 30% tax withholding and building a specific income volatility buffer entirely separate from standard emergency savings. So what does that mean? What that means is, say if you're doing a 9-to-5, we're going to break this down two ways. One, where you have the 9-to-5 and you have the little side hustle. And then two, where you, your side hustle now is becoming your main gig and how you're breaking that down. So as far as if you're doing a 9-to-5 with it, along with it, what that breaks down is saying, I'm doing my 9-to-5, paying my 401k, I'm saving some money, whatever the case is. Treat the business as a separate entity. Cool. So that business as a separate entity is now out of its 100% of whatever it is. So let's say, let's give some numbers to these things. Let's say you work your 9-to-5 and you make $50,000 a year. You're doing your side hustle and now it's making, we'll say $20,000 a year. So now in total, you're making like 70. But you keep that 20 separate. You got to deduct 30% of that for the taxes. So 30% of the 20,000, I'm trying to do some quick math inside my head. That's $4,000 if I'm correct. $4,000, you put that aside right off the bat for taxes, or at least some point in the year before you start, maybe on a monthly basis, you break down to 30% of income every month. So that way, at the end of the year, it equates to the $4,000 that you got to put aside for taxes, because you're going to do your taxes at the end of the year. The one thing that's great about a business is you're not paying taxes every month, every paycheck or anything like that. You pay them at the end of the year. So, excuse me, you guys. Sorry about that. So, then would come things like, so when they say, I'm sorry, let me grip my chain of thought back again. So, yes, like I said, handling it as its own separate thing and breaking everything down with it and having that buffer zone. Deduct the amount of taxes. Then you're going to deduct what needs to go back into that business, whatever that thing is. If you have to buy products to fuel it, because maybe you're reviewing products, you put money back into it by reviewing products. Or maybe you have to do things like just, what's the word I'm looking for? Like accessory type of things, like items that you have to buy to fuel it. Maybe you need camera gear, newer camera gear. Maybe you need better audio stuff. Maybe you need, like you said, you're paying someone for editing, all these kind of things like that. In that case, you're going to now have to allocate a certain amount of money that goes to that. And after you do all that kind of stuff, mind you, if you have the 9-to-5, you don't need to be putting in a 401k. You don't need to do any of those things because that's what your primary job for. And what this allows is for you to put more into your savings in your primary job, where like say you're making the 50,000, you're now able to put more of that into regular savings, into your 401k or whatever, because the side hustle now is just extra cash. So you're going to view it a little differently. It's its own separate business, but it's also, because it's a supplemental, you don't need to now put away things like a 401k from it. So it's just pay its taxes, pay whatever things you need to keep the business running, and then from there, whatever's left is your extra income. Now, let's take it from the approach that your side hustle has now gotten very big and it's your only income. Let's say that you now are making 70,000 off what was the side hustle is now your primary thing. You don't have a 9 to 5 now. Now you got to take 30% of that, which is $14,000, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. $14,000 is the 30%, and that's not right. That's definitely not right. I'm sorry. 140. I'm sorry. Where am I getting this math? It's not calculating right, and I don't know why. Anyway, 30%. I'm not going to do the math right now off the top of my head, but 10%. I don't know why I'm having a brain fart right now. 10% is 7,000. So 3 times that is 21,000 should be 30%. 21,000 is 30%. You put your 30% aside. Now you gotta put in for re-putting into the business, the investment. Like we said, you have people doing editing. Maybe you need special equipment, whatever the case is, lighting. You need, like mics. You need better video equipment, whatever the case is. You need to hire an editor. Maybe as the business expands, you need more additional help, whatever that might be. These are the things that has to come first. If you have products that you have to buy, you got to put into the products. But now the only addition versus when you had a 9 to 5 is you also now have to pay into health insurance. You also now have to pay into your own 401k, your own savings, whatever the case is. Now that makes the weight and the pressure of this go high now. And that's kind of where I think the difference is in terms of the weight of it being its own independent thing versus a side gig hustle. A side gig, you can always kind of dial back on it. You also don't have to allocate extra money towards things like I said, 401k and this and that. And I've known a lot of people too who, couples who will have a business. One person has a business, say the man has a business, and then the woman will do a 9 to 5 just for the health benefits, because the health benefits that come along with it are easier than the guy who's doing the business, the other partner in the relationship now having to do that, because health insurance can be expensive. And sometimes when you work with a full-time job, that cut of health insurance is a great deal off. Now, everybody's different, but that is sometimes workaround. But like I said, when you have it where you have both the 9 to 5 and you're doing the side gig, it really makes it sometime a little less pressure. And that definitely is a difference. So, but like I said, as far as the answer to how to do it, frame it if you're doing it when it comes to you having a 9 to 5, as I mentioned before, and as they mentioned here, frame it as a side business. But as far as what to allocate in the way of what you would do the same 9 to 5. Allocate your money in the same way. But obviously, you're not going to need to do health insurance. You could still add onto your 401k, a personal one outside of the job. So you could do that with the side hustle. So we'll say taxes, investment income back into the business, and then additional savings going to a 401k or a separate investment account if you would like. If it is not your side hustle and it's your main hustle, now, like I said, once again, frame it like your 9 to 5. Health insurance, taxes, obviously you're going to write down how much you're putting into all these things, but health insurance, taxes, reinvestment into the business, and 401k savings or any kind of investment that you have to do for your retirement. And that is pretty much the backbone of it. And obviously what's left over is what you spend for your own just leisure, but you also got to have an emergency fund savings as well. So keep in mind, that's always a category too, where you have a 9 to 5. Sometimes we don't think about that because we know we're getting paid every 2 weeks, whatever the case is. Even when you have a 9 to 5, you should be having a little nest egg of emergency funds. You definitely want to have that when you have a side business. So anyway, you guys, put down your comments down below. As always, like, share, comment, subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.